Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where today's most exciting solopreneurs share their startup stories. They also deliver tangible strategies that they would implement personally if starting their business over today. Each episode is a startup masterclass. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Bill Woolsey. Bill, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
You know, it's not very often that I talk to people that I think their studio looks much cooler than mine, but yours, I'm sitting here with just green with envy as I'm seeing that wall behind you, thinking, you know what, I got to up my game because my virtual backgrounds just don't fly.
There's an easy way to up your game, Kevin. This is called a frame, and it's a cloth thing, and it goes around an aluminum frame. And I was talking to somebody else this morning on Zoom, and they said, "Man, that's a cool brick wall you have." And I said, "Well, it's called a sheet." And
it looks great. It absolutely looks great for sure.
That's awesome.
I appreciate that. And you know what? You've already thrown me off my intro, so I'm going to give you a space to kind of recover us here. So tell us a little bit about Bill Woolsey.
Kevin, I've been a pastor since 1987. I was always the guy in the congregations as associates that I was in charge of evangelism. So I was in charge of reaching new people. And I come from a family where my mom was a huge entrepreneur. And so I kind of was in my blood. And the third call I had 9 years in was to go start a church in West Houston. So my family and I went there, and we, by the grace of God, decided to approach it like a new business. We had a line of credit. We had 40 acres. We started with a staff right out of the gate. And kind of all the antithesis of what I thought you would do when you started a church. But it was the only way I knew, because I'd only been in large staffs all my life, all my ministry. So it went really quickly. We grew three sites, 1,600 in worship from 7 families, and God just really blessed it. In the process, I started working with church planters. That's a difficult thing to do, to plant a church. And we started this network called FiveTwo, FiveTwo.com in 2009. But about 3 years in, we realized that the secret sauce and the untapped resource in the church, if we wanted to see more people know Jesus, were these entrepreneurial lay people. And these women and men who have a heart to help people, and they had an idea, but they didn't know what to do with it. And that's when we kind of pivoted as a network and started focusing there. 2015, we launched our training called Start New, and we did that in person for about 5 years. And then right before COVID hit, God was incredibly gracious and gave us a gift where during COVID, we just transitioned all the training into an online platform. So that's what I do. I live outside the hill country in Austin, outside of Austin, Texas. Gorgeous. Right now I'm looking out my window at beautiful scenery. Wife of 37 years, just 2 days ago. And
congratulations.
Thank you. So, and 3 kids, all grown with kids of their own starting and all that kind of stuff. So I have a beautiful family, very blessed, and I get to work with some wonderfully creative people who are trying to help people.
So tell me about the training, kind of the network idea. So is the training primarily are you also training people on how to be a good business person, or are they already bringing those skills to the table and you're just saying, okay, how do we add a faith element to this?
So it's the first part, I would say it's a very holistic approach. So our training, when it was in person before COVID, would kick off with the 48-hour boot camp, and then it would last 2 years. You'd have a coach every month, and you'd have sessions every 6 months with you and your team. Very team oriented. But what we discovered in all of this was, if you look at our training, we really help you build, fund, and launch new ventures. So those 3 legs, those 3 pillars: build, fund, and launch. And in the build, we start with you and your team. So we want to help you build you and your team. Then you build your customer, because that sets the tone for everything. and then you build your actual venture you're offering. So in that section where we really focus on you, it's very values driven. It's why you do what you do, help you make sure you're very self-aware and understand that. Because when you go start something, your values become the values of the org.
Yeah.
And most entrepreneurs don't fully articulate that or understand that. But because what we want them to do is we want them to bring Jesus to the party. We don't want him to leave, them to leave him back home.
Right.
And so we do some of that. And we also then, out of Mark 6, which is where we take our seminal story for our name, the feeding of the 5,000, 5 loaves and 2 fish. We teach them about Jesus's, the values he demonstrates. And then throughout the training, we lovingly call it Mother Teresa meets a friendly Mark Cuban. And so
picture that in your mind, listeners.
You picture it is. We actually have a picture that we show, and it does kind of freak you out a little bit. But the whole point of that is, your point about what does it mean to be a good, and I would just say a faith-based business person. It does have both sides of the coin, right? And it is the fact that you're operating from a position of trust and faith in Christ, but then you are wise in the ways of the world. And we teach you lean business startup principles. You don't, you only spend $1 once. I remember this big financial person, when we started CrossPoint and Katie outside of Houston, we were standing on the street, and he was one of the guys with Enron, and when Enron went under, the government kept him to close it down. So very reputable, high integrity. But Drew said, "Bill, you can only spend $1 one time, and make sure before you spend it." And I thought, wow, that's really good. I've never heard that before.
Let me write that down.
So I write that one down.
I'll use that later.
Yeah. So we teach you that. We use a business model canvas approach, which we've appropriated and added the Mother Teresa elements and the Jesus stuff into it. So it's a proprietary format. But we teach you like financial forecasting, and we have this really cool tool that a guy, one of my leaders years ago, gave me, and so we brought that forward and that kind of thing. So it's holistic. But it's not, obviously it's not an MBA in business admin or something like that.
Might be more valuable in some places, some cases.
It's very practical. And that's, when we started FiveTwo, Kevin, what we heard from church planters was, okay, I got all the theology, but how the heck do I do this? What are the practical steps? And we took that same practical value and brought it into our training now. So it's very how to. Matter of fact, when we work with church planters, we'll say, look, your theological framework, you need to get that from whoever's sending you or whatever. We're obviously going to have, we have a sacramental approach, meaning the presence of Christ. You're the sacred elements of Christ there, but we're not going to teach you exegesis or something like that. I probably will, because I'm a stickler on it, but that's not intentional.
You can't take the pastor out of the boy.
No, you cannot.
At some level, that is true.
No, you cannot.
So is this primarily geared towards the startup space, or is this any business that wants to really incorporate kind of a faith element to it?
It's any business. We even have a bonus module on evangelism, because my whole thing is, if we're going to help you start something, we don't want to just help you start a coffee shop or right. We want you to introduce more people to Jesus. And so we teach you a way to do that that's non-threatening. It's not in your face. It's a lean in kind of way. But what we've also found in businesses or nonprofits, so because we've worked with them all, it's marketplace ministry or whatever you want to call that, kingdom business as well, churches. What we found is that our material and our process works phenomenally for startup, so idea to launch, basically. But it also works very well for stuck organizations.
Yeah.
Because
almost like a restart. Yeah.
That's right. Usually you're stuck because you've lost sight of your customer. And what we help you, we really drill in. We spend a lot of time in our training on love your customer and what it looks like to love your customer. Our phrase is, you can't reach someone you hate. And so what does it really look like in your behaviors and your values and your expressions to love somebody that God wants you to serve. And that's why we spend a lot of time in our build section of the training on the pains and gains of that person and helping you get into their shoes. If you've already been in their shoes, we have a number of our starts that just very successful. And their idea when they came in was pretty spot on. But our practice is you need to hold your idea loosely, because most people have not really thought through who this is for.
Yeah.
They're just projecting themselves
Right.
onto it. You know,
I thought it was a great idea.
that was a great
Yeah,
idea.
I hadn't asked anybody, no market research. It's just a great idea. I would like this.
That's right.
I don't know the 10,000 other people would.
If you're trying to reach 100,000 of you, then okay, you know. So,
but if I'm not my avatar, then I'm in trouble. That's right.
If I'm not my avatar, that's
That is
awesome.
exactly
I'm going to take
right.
that phrase too, Kevin,
Hey,
if you don't mind.
use it later. That's exactly right. It is interesting to me, the kind of the thought process behind the kind of idea to launch. So you get to the point where you're funding, but is that early enough in the process? And is that, are you really like serving as an incubator as well? I mean, are you an equity fund on top of this, or do you
That's a
have
great
equity
question.
money behind it?
Right. It's a great question. We get asked that a lot. We just created a small fund for that purpose. We actually created it back in May of last year in COVID. And what we will do starting here in the fall is, if you're part of our process, if you're enrolled in our process, you'll have access to a Shark Tank. So, because when we do this live, which we will reinstitute as parts of the country come out of COVID, when we do it live in the 48 hours, we culminate with a Shark Tank, because it forces you to think and pitch under pressure, and it gets you going, you know. But we will do that now as part of scholarships or grants, you might say, up to $5,000 for you. So we are not, you know, like some of the incubators I know, and part of a global and collaborative initiative. We're not in the funding realm. We're in the training realm. And frankly, though, like, gosh, a majority of our starts came in with virtually no money, but we teach them how to get the money.
Right.
And, you know, coming out of the feeding of the 5,000, one of the reasons we chose that story as the name of our network was that in that miracle in Mark 6, when the disciples come to Jesus and say, the crowd's hungry, you need to send them away, he only speaks twice in that miracle, Jesus does, in Mark 6, and both times it's a command. And the first one is he commands them, you give them something to eat. So he's holding them accountable, and they can't shirk it. In which, when we work with churches or nonprofits, hey, the people around you, you're accountable for them, right? You can't just pretend and go drive back to your suburb. And then at the second time, when they say,
no, wait. What do you mean I can't just drive back to my suburb? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you, old
I just wanted to camp on that one.
Thank you, old missionary pastor person yourself. But then the other side of that is when they go, well, you don't want us to spend half a year's wages, surely. And he says, go, and he commands them, go and see what's there. And that's really the main thing. And that's what's so powerful about a business model canvas approach. One of the biggest blocks there is partnerships. And when we have taught people, don't worry about the money right now. Let's get the idea. Let's get who you're serving. Let's get this thing fleshed out. You're going to be shocked at how God provides. And time again, we see that. So
I'm glad you were as thorough as you were in that answer, because I mean, the thing that kept resonating in my mind is, like, I've had other guests that have like business, consultation services, and they say, yeah, I really wanted to focus on the startup space, and the common answer, the next thing out of their mouth is, yeah, but startups don't have any money. It's exactly what I heard over, and I could write a book on startups don't have any money. So I was curious how, if you're aiming at that space, is this is it a back end equity percentage that you're taking? Is it is that type of model that says, when you get this launched, retributively, we're gonna draw some?
Well, let me just say to that, so we have our FiveTwo network, which is a network, and then our training arm is Start New Training. The training arm we charge for, but our whole financial model as a network is we're half donative, half earned. So
Hmm.
we rely on donors to help us make the training affordable. And by doing that, in essence, our core outcome that we want for you is we measure success in two ways. One, financial sustainability, and secondly, more people knowing Jesus.
Hmm.
Now, you're going to have other core outcomes you want, but those are the two we want you to agree with if we work with you. And that first one, we're training gurus. I mean, we know if you'll work this process, your chances of success go greatly up. Okay. But if you say, well, I just don't want to do that or that or that, well, you can, you're an adult, but so we're here to, in essence, we're like risk insurance on startups, especially if it's an organization, a nonprofit with a bunch of individuals they're sending, or a denomination with planting or whatever, because we have that financial sustainability value. We want to make sure that you're not going to waste your time and be gone in 6 months.
Right, right.
If you're here. So
So let me start asking the uncomfortable questions now. That
okay.
yeah, these may be a little more
If all of a sudden
difficult.
my
So
mic goes silent,
that's right. Sorry, you're muted. I can't
you're
hear you.
muted.
Yeah. So when I think about kind of the interactive faith in the business space, I think of almost two separate and distinct models.
Hmm.
So you have a model that says, we're virtually founded on Christian principle. So, we're going to do business by the golden rule. We're going to be honest. We're going to have
Moral,
high integrity,
ethical, that kind of
moral,
stuff.
ethical. Yeah, but certainly not evangelistic. And then you have companies that are more evangelistic, and it seems like that they tend to run into a lot more friction and even I think aggressive,
Hmm.
aggressiveness toward them in the marketplace that says, how dare you interject your faith in when I just want to buy a sandwich, when I just want to, fill in the blank. So how have
John
you guys?
3:16 on the bottom of the wrapper of the In-N-Out burger or
Oh,
whatever it is.
no doubt about it.
Right.
That's yeah,
Right.
that's there's different models out there, Chick-fil-A, In-N-Out
Right.
Burger,
Right. Right.
Home
Right.
Depot, whatever, or not Home Depot, but
Hobby Lobby.
Hobby Lobby. Yeah. So you've got one thing is sitting in Texas, which might be the in the Bible Belt, so to speak. You go to Seattle, it's a completely different environment. How do you kind of equip businesses to be able to operate?
Well, first of all, we've done, yes, I'm sitting in Texas, but primarily most of our work has been in Michigan, New York State, Florida, Georgia, Arizona, a smattering out in California. We have a number of groups and ministries that love us with the network out in Seattle and Washington, Oregon. So this is why, when I look back, so like our training is really a curation of stuff we intuitively did in starting ministries, but never really thought about how we did it. Okay. And frankly, most entrepreneurs, when you ask them, so how'd you do that? They have no idea. They just, and they're the apostle prophetic evangelists that God just wired them, and they just kind of know how to build momentum, and they know how to go gather, they just go on and do it. And that's why we want to leverage those people like crazy in the church and for the sake of good. But so what I would say to you, one of our fortes and my fortes was evangelizing without offending.
Mm.
And I for lack of, for whatever reason, God just always put on my heart two particular passages. One is 1 Peter 3, always be prepared to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do so with gentleness and respect.
Mm.
And so, Peter's whole thing there is you're prepared to give the reason. You're not out there cramming down people's throats the reason.
Sure.
which is a huge relational. And you were in mission field internationally, and when you come into a brand new culture, you got to earn a right at the table. I mean, you don't just get to go sit at the main table and start, promoting all your stuff. People invite you to the table. So that whole aspect of what does it look like to be a person who's invited to give the reason for the hope you have. And then the second one comes out of 1 Corinthians 9, Paul saying, I become all things to all people that I might save some, which not everybody's going to go for you, but there are some. But the impetus or the methodology to do that is Paul, and especially Acts 17, the Areopagus, of how he takes where people are already and lives with them and affirms the good they have going on in their lives. And then, boom, at some point he gets to the resurrection, people freak out, but some go, hey, that's kind of cool. I want to hear more about that. So when we work with you as a business leader, obviously it has to be a value of yours. I mean, it's going to flow out of you. We're not, otherwise you wouldn't want us in there. But when we do, it's for you to understand that, yes, it is moral and ethical. Obviously, it should be all of that, look like Jesus stuff. But at the end of the day, it has to also have a verbal component to it. Otherwise, they just think you're a great guy, but that's not going to do them.
Everybody
squat,
turns into St. Francis.
Right. That's exactly right. We'll have the little animals run through and bless them as they go or something. But I'll probably get letters on that one anyway. So, but
I just offended half your audience. Yeah, forgive me. I did not mean that pejoratively.
But I would just say, it's why, and we're huge in story, and we're huge in kind of like third party stuff. So I was big in family systems counseling. One of the most effective counseling methodologies is, or you'll see this in couples, they'll talk about each other in third person, even though they're sitting right there. Right. And so one of the ways we encourage people to be prepared to share is as simple as, that reminds me of a story one time about Jesus. Okay. So again, you're just introducing him. You're just saying something. You're not forcing, and you're kind of like, I'll just put it out there, and you don't have to do anything with it. But if you do something with it. So it obviously is a behavioral issue of what does it look like to live a Christ-like life. But then what are some ways that through your own stories of you can just let people know about Jesus in non-offensive kind of ways. Now, again, you're always going to have some settings that people might take offense at that. And there is some wisdom, especially from a legal standpoint with employees and all of that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean you just abdicate it and vacate the square or vacate that space. Let's be wise about it, and let's be intentional. So,
right. We were talking just a little bit off camera about kind of the business as mission space. And so, I'm always thinking in these kind of bilateral terms, and I'm thinking, you have people out there that are in the business of mission space, that it's almost like I do business as an end to a means to get to evangelism. It's like a necessary evil to kind of, I got to play at this just enough so I can get in those relationships and get those connections and that type of thing. Or you've got the other side of the coin that says, you know what, you take mission out of the mix and the business would stand on its own. And so I'm assuming that you would lean a little bit toward the latter, because it sounds like to me that you want to do everything with excellence. And so talk a little bit about kind of those two schools of thought.
Sure. As I said, kind of off camera, our appreciation for business mission, the current terminology is marketplace ministry, you can have kingdom business, all those things are pretty synonymous. But my appreciation for that grew out of a dear friend of mine who was with United World Mission, and Jeff was very gifted at language. I mean, God just gave him a gift to learn language, and he'd worked for IBM. He and his wife, Robin, went with UWM probably around 93, 94. And so we kept in touch over the decades, and somewhere around 2011, he had been in Moscow and then Kyrgyzstan. Then he was down in Thailand and then Hanoi. And what he had shared was it was so hard to get into those. He said, if you came in and the government said, so what do you do for a living? And you said nothing.
Yeah, I'm
You're
a
a
tourist.
suspect, right? I'm a tourist. Yeah.
Been here 20
So,
years. I'm a tourist.
right. 20 years. So that whole understanding of I'm going to go in and disciple basically the business leaders in areas and help them be better business people, but then also have this opportunity to share with them, my life. And I what I always liked about that was it's easy to not share, right? I mean, it's very easy to just live life at a certain surface level. But Jeff was very intentional that First Peter 3, I'm always going to be prepared to give that reason. And so in our teaching, yes, we do things with excellence. Yes, I frankly think that's you should, period, because God has given you some incredible resources and desires. But I would also say to you, we're not here to just help you have a good coffee shop. Okay. So we actually could. I mean, we could help you have a really good coffee shop, but that's not why we exist. And so when we do talk with people, like if you're trying to do something and this is a fine line here, and making money is your leading value, then there are a lot of Christian organizations that would fit that. Okay. We would say we want the leading value to be something like helping people or expanding the kingdom or something like that. But we also want you to be able to financially sustain, because money's not the mission, but where there's no money, there's no mission.
Right.
And so we want you to be wise to that, but that's not where we lead from. It's not my heart. Now, God's always provided financially. We've seen this time and time again, but it's kind of like the love of money is the root of all evil. And so let's not run with that one first.
Right. Would you say your primary client base would be church planters? I mean, is that the kind of the broad breadth, or is it just kind of a general?
No, it's
space?
definitely it's interesting. Our client base, first of all, they don't self-identify as entrepreneur. That's a scary term for them at times.
Why is that?
I don't know. I think maybe it's because of the Mark Cuban, Shark Tank stuff on TV, that this is a high-powered, maybe ruthless
Greedy,
at times.
Yeah,
greedy.
Yeah.
And so they're uncomfortable with that. They do like the word starter. They're kind of a starter. They've started stuff.
Yeah. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to start a church too.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. No, we have worked with a lot of planters. I would say now, though, the pendulum has swung for us that we work with a lot of lay people who are starting some kind of a either nonprofit or a for-profit, but they really do have a kind of a compassion heart or something. They're trying to fix some kind of social issue in some form or fashion. Now, we actually, though, in our training, what we're wanting them to become and to understand their calling even more fully is that, in essence, in many situations, they may very well become the pastor of those people. Okay.
Right.
And again, numerous stories in our starts usually are oftentimes from women who are just wonderful leaders. I think of a former police officer in Detroit. She worked in sex crime. She started a wonderful ministry, Ellie's House, to sex traffic women. She's done a number of funerals for women who were murdered on the streets that were part of her ministry. And then we've got another lady sitting over in Arizona who's literally the number one Ford sales rep in the Southwest. And she and her husband have started and lead a wonderful homeless ministry that's phenomenal resource center in Mesa, Arizona. And she truly gets it. I mean, she is the pastor to those people. She feels Jesus, the sheep without a shepherd, compassion for them. but that wasn't where, I don't think they, well, I know they didn't see themselves that way going in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But they've become that. And that's where I think I'm so excited about what we do, because in essence, as our culture has moved farther and farther away from Christianity, and the church at times hasn't tried to stay in the stream, we need these new expressions that just introduce people to Jesus. Okay. They're not going to be worship centric,
Yep.
maybe like a church plant, but they are going to be Jesus centric, and that's going to be their heart. So
it's really an interesting approach, and it's one of the more unique. I mean, I've kind of been in and out of this space for a long time, and it's a really unique approach that you've taken here, and I want to applaud your efforts, and certainly see value in what you're trying to do. But tell me some of the things that, if you could go back, when you first started this, just really, I mean, this was a startup even for you as well. So
right,
tell me some of
right.
these lessons that you've learned that you think, man, I wish we'd have known this early. It would have made life so much easier.
Yeah. I saw a couple things. One is that from 2009 to 2015, I was leading two organizations. So I was leading our congregation. Now, by the grace of God, we'd built out a staffing org chart and things that allowed me to do that, but it was getting more and more crazy. And I felt that at some point I wanted to go lead this network full time, but I never had put a stake in the ground. I probably, one of the things I probably would do over again would be at times more purposeful in making some decisions. I've always kind of in my life taken an approach of God will make it clear if that's what He wants. So I do think, though, my wife is the one who's slightly more purposeful, and I've had other leaders and boards around me that were. I you know I know that question. I knew you were going to ask me that question on what we would do over. Now if I were to start churches, I would use our process because we finally have it all nailed down, and we just
That's what I wish I knew then was things that
I
worked.
mean, that's
right.
exactly why we did our training platform. I wish I would have
Love
known
it.
all this 20 years ago.
That's right.
So I can tell you a painful point in my in my 20 years. So when I led CrossPoint, we scaled very quickly. We went from 7 families all the way up to 1,600, 3 locations, large staff, preschool of 400 kids. And so it went boom, 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 boom. And whenever you do that, the staff and it has to be willing to change as it grows.
Yeah.
If they don't embrace that, it's Ram Sharon's book on leadership pipeline is a phenomenal book, and I've used it in our leadership institutes over years. And he talks about at every stage of the ladder, you've got to be willing to change your values, which means to change your behaviors. And it's the behaviors that are so hard for us to change. And so I would just say that was painful for me, as at times some staff just didn't want to change or couldn't. And so in that growing season, there was a churn at times that I just wish I wish I wouldn't have had to go through, and I wish some of them wouldn't have to go through, because they'd look at us and go, "Oh, I want to be there." Well, you don't understand. To be here is craziness,
Yeah.
And then the same thing in our network, that we've had different seasons that we've moved through, and different seasons have required different mindsets and different skill sets. Like right now, with much of the world, our staff at FiveTwo has been deployed ever since the beginning. So we've never all been together. So when COVID hit, on one hand, we were like, this is no change for us. We meet every Tuesday morning on Zoom. But at the same time, it meant we really went all in digital more than ever before. And that obviously requires a whole new skill set. It requires different vendors. And so I think that for me, I wish I would have known or appreciated how painful some of the change can be. And I remember one time the CFO we had at CrossPoint, she said to me, She said, I've never met anybody like you. You see change as a resource. And I thought, huh, actually, that's true. I do see it as a resource. But at the same time, that's quite unnerving to a slice of the population.
A huge slice of the
A
population.
huge slice of the
Yeah.
population.
Matter of fact, I would say
So-
the population, except for people that are outliers. Almost.
So,
It's not
so
a 50
anyway,
50 gain. That's right.
yeah. So, my wife and I, we talk about this a lot. You look back, would you do stuff differently? And I don't know. I'm a sovereignty of God kind of person that, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had a few train wrecks and at times, and you just kind of go, man, that was a wreck, or whatever. It hurt a lot, or, that staff relationship, whatever it may be. And, but you're like, okay, God, you were okay with me going through that, and you had something there, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time lamenting it as much as what can I learn to not repeat it, or whatever it may be. So,
I mean, I love the when you were talking about, just adapting to change, like your staff adapting to change. That is so true in any startup,
Yep,
as it
it's
goes
very
through
true.
this growth curve, that
That's
you know,
right.
you can, who started this, to the team that started it may not be the team that can carry it to the next level.
And it's interesting because early on with CrossPoint, Gallup was doing a huge study of successful planners or effective planners, and they invited me to be part of it. And I remember them saying at one point, what we found is that the individual who's able to scale, on one hand, they have this trait of humble confidence. So they're very confident, but they're also very open to,
Mm.
that may not work, and I need to be open to new ideas. Harvard had an article that I carded. It's still in my my computer, and I still refer to it, on why entrepreneurs can't scale. And it really does. It comes down to this whole thing of Sharon saying, you've got to be willing to change your values, and you've got to be willing to change your behavior. And so you'll get people who will say things like, well, I'm just a serial entrepreneur. What they're really saying is, I just really enjoy being a serial entrepreneur. Okay, that's fine.
Or they love the early startup phase.
They love the early
Yeah.
startup. I know you might know, I know planters like that, right? They'll go
Mhm.
and plant a little thing and do it and move on.
Pass it on. Yeah.
Yeah, pass it off. And sometimes they pass off well, and sometimes they don't pass off well. And so I think that for me, my goal was always to try to see if I could figure out how to scale. And so when we work with, like, I just worked here locally with a husband and wife who, she runs a nonprofit. She's a United Methodist Church pastor, a lovely lady, and he's a doctor, and they have a medical clinic that has just gone bonkers. And so they said, hey, could you meet with us? Strong Christian people, I mean, lovely people, and said, could you meet with us and help us figure out the chaos that we have and how to bring some order out of it? And it was a classic case of, they had just grown so fast, and now they
Mhm.
needed to rethink how they reorder. But from my family systems background, if you really want the mobile to change, there has to be a piece that's willing to change, because then it will make everything else
Yeah.
offset. And the founder is the one. Okay. The founder either has to change and say, I'm going to take on this new role, which is often hard to do, or they have to say, I value that role so much, I will defer to that role. And especially when you get to that point of growth where you've got to have some organizational structure so that everybody knows what they're supposed to do, that founder has to promote that value in the
Mm.
form of person and behaviors in the org, or else it doesn't happen. So
I'm glad that I think you've touched on clarification, but I want to close today with just a clarifying question, and then I want you to tell everybody where the best place to touch base with you online is. But it's almost counterintuitive what you said, that the founder has to change values. So to me, that sounds almost exactly opposite or antithetical to everything else you've talked about this. So clarify that for me a little bit, what you mean. you're not talking about intrinsic, the things that drive me at my core being. You're talking, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You define that.
Yeah, you're a great interviewer and you catch the nuances. So our training, and I believe very strongly that it's your passion and your values that are going to energize you and move you out and get this new thing going. So on one hand, you've got this value or passion for individuals or whatever it may be, but at the same time, and again, you and I were talking in the context of scaling. We were talking in the
Yeah.
context of a founder saying, I actually want to kind of see this thing grow and blow, as opposed to I love that early phase and I want to go do another early phase. So I do have to say to you, and I learned this the hard way. So this is probably going back to one of your questions of earlier. There was a season of my ministry that, and who knows if I got this through seminary or whatever, but it was something like pastors, I don't need to pay attention to the money. Okay. And what I learned the hard way there was if I didn't pay attention to the money, somebody would. And it was probably going to be at the detriment of the vision and the org. And so I had to all of a sudden say, you know what? It's very important for me to pay attention to the money. And that was not my typical modus operandi. And that what that meant was, and ever since then I've done this, I have I have a forecasting spreadsheet that we use, and I know where we're looking at money being every month, and we reforecast every month. And I've done this now for a decade with every org, and it meant that I needed to sit down with the financial people and ask the hard questions and own that. Now that was not Bill Woolsey's true north going into that. Now, again, I could have said, I don't want to do it, but then you need to put somebody else in the senior role,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of what I'm talking
Sure.
about. And actually, there's probably some intrinsic value there that did change in me, but it changed because I had a more prominent or a value of saying, I really want to try to see this thing through. I really
Mm-hmm.
want to, I want to grow and change as a leader.
Right.
Okay. And that trumped the other ones,
Yeah.
you might say. So
I love the way you clarified that, and the way you just closed this out with really the importance of, being, I think I'd written something down a long time ago that able to compromise position without compromising conviction.
that's a great statement. Yeah.
Just that whole idea of being able to bend, where bending is necessary without, being untrue to, the core of, the core value there. But Bill, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time on a Friday afternoon, and I'm the only step between you and a weekend. And
actually, Kevin, you haven't. I don't know if you've been to Texas, but a buddy staying with me while my wife is living with my daughter, who's in early labor out in Phoenix. And he and I, as soon as we stop this recording, we are going over to Llano, Texas, to Cooper's Barbecue. Shameless plug, best barbecue around. So
Cooper's, we get an affiliate cut for all barbecue sold off this podcast. We look for a check in the mail. But Bill, tell everybody where the best place to contact you.
There are a couple ways you can do that. We would love for you to kick the tires on and explore our training platform at startnewtraining.com. Again, our donors have made it where it's very accessible, very inexpensive. It's soup to nuts, everything you need to go from idea to launch. Or if you're stuck, making sure you spend that good time in who's your customer, who does God want you to be serving, and that's all in there, including fundraising and all sorts of stuff. So startnewtraining.com, all one word, would be there. You can send me an email if you have email questions, and I or our staff will all gladly respond. That's B as in boy, Woolsey, WOOLSEY at FiveTwo, FIVETWO.com. You can also go in through either FiveTwo.com or startnewtraining.com and click on contact us, and we'll reach out. And we're really big on talking with you. If you come in through that, we'll send you an email and you can grab a 15-minute time with us, and we'd love to hear your story and hear what God has put on your heart. So
Bill, once again, I thank you for taking the time. And I've had to suffer through your beautiful background for the entire podcast here. I have
I actually
overcome.
like yours. I was jealous of yours. You got like a green plant and everything there. So
I'm sorry, but it's fake. But I hate to burst your bubble, but
mine's fake too.
It's a Google image that's a virtual background. So, Bill, thanks again for just taking the time and as you're heading into your weekend to share with us and really just help all boats rise in a rising tide. Bill, have a great weekend.
Thank you, Kevin. You too.
Another episode in the books. We hope you heard some great takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on iTunes and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening to Rising Tide.